Do you know of someone who ruined their life in just a matter of minutes? If so, how did they do it? Excluding accidents and fights. Guy got intoxicated at corporate holiday party and made out at party, consensual, with work wife, who was a one-rank subordinate. HR department unimpressed with violation of zero tolerance policy. Fired for cause. Actual wife unimpressed with excuses. Filed for divorce. Story 2. She sold pills that she knew contained fentanyl to 2 people. The first one passed away. She found out. Sold the same pills to another person. That person passed away. Boom. Life in prison. The texts between her dealer are what led to her arrest and exposed that she had full and complete knowledge that the pills would result in an overdose. Story 3. When I was in my early 20 years old, I worked as an energy worker in field service. One of my really close friends was someone who I was on calls with regularly. A project lead pressured both of us to work on equipment we weren't qualified or trained to work on, and we unfortunately relented. We were halfway done with the task, and I walked out to the truck to grab water bottles. Halfway to the truck, I hear a giant buzz, then a huge bang, then screaming. By the time I get back to the generator room, he's fully on fire. The cabinet had arc blasted, and he had been right in the way. By the time I got our fire blanket from the truck, he was basically fully engulfed. I was able to put him out and get him into as much of a recovery position as I could, and then I called our shop to get them to organize rescue to our location. He somehow survived 90 precinct second and third degree burns, but coded so many times he ended up with severe brain damage from oxygen deprivation. He lost his eyes, his sense of smell and taste, and much of his sense of touch. I think he lost his hearing too from the noise of it too. He's in a vegetative state in a full-time care facility now. Story 4. An ex-girlfriend of mine, lovely person, was out at a bar with a friend one night. They had a meal and played pool. When they left, for some reason, she drove his car. I don't know why, but I know that when she and I were together, she asked to drive my car just for the experience of driving a different car. Maybe that was it. And I imagine driving in someone else's car, you take a few extra seconds to adjust the seat and the mirrors and get your bearings. Unbeknownst to her, a teenager was driving a Mustang nearby. He was pissed because someone passed him a mile earlier, and his ego was hurt. He decided to catch up to the guy and floored the Mustang, getting up to speeds in excess of 100 miles per hour. As my ex pulled out of the parking lot to cross the median, she had no way of seeing the Mustang barreling toward her over a hill. He crashed into her, she passed away, and her passenger passed away too. 2 seconds earlier or later, and they would not have made contact. I went to his trial. I remember her poor mother sitting there stone-faced while testimony was given. Several lives were ruined in that moment. My ex was only 26 years old. She never got married, never had kids, never found her way in life. Story 5. He was excited to see a band. He decided to slide down the escalator wall between the up and down as he went to Subway tripped. Fell 2 stories-ish, and that was the end. Story 6. When I was a teenager, my dad and this dude had beef with each other. My dad was dating this guy's ex-wife, and he didn't like that. They bumped into each other at a bar and exchanged some words. My dad left the bar, and the dude was waiting for him outside. A car rolled up, and somebody handed the dude a handgun. He pointed at his head from about 2 feet away and pulled the trigger. Luckily for my father, the gun jammed. My pops wasn't taking any chances, so he took off running. The dude cleared the gun and emptied the clip, missing all but 1 shot that hit my dad in the back. My dad was already downtown, and the hospital was only a couple blocks away, or so he thought. Unluckily for my padre, the hospital was under renovation and preparing for relocation. When he saw that it was under construction, he slumped over and called 911 for an ambulance. The dude got an attempted murder charge and almost 15 years in prison. Story 7. I had a friend who got into his car drunk with 5 other people, flipped the car, and one of the passengers passed away. He went from being this charming, good-looking, likable guy to a shut-in and was seen as a monster to a lot of people in the community. He ended up taking his life away about a year after the accident. He was seriously broken about what had happened. Story 8. Kid I went to high school with wasn't going to graduate and decided to protest by speeding and doing wheelies on the road in front of the school. On his 3rd round, he passes a pickup truck, hooks his leg on the bumper, and is thrown from the bike right on his head, snapping his neck. School posthumously graduated him. Story 9. Guy I went to high school with was kicked out of his college and moved back home. After some time of living at home, his dad walked into his bedroom and went off about him being a lazy ass and needing to do something with his life. He decided he was going to take his gun and rob a bank. Supposedly, the gun wasn't loaded, but he did successfully rob the bank and get away. Some time went by. He moved out of his parents' house and started living it up. He eventually told someone he trusted. That person turned him in. He was arrested and charged. He got a count for every person who was in the bank because he had a gun. You can decide if he ruined his life when he decided to rob the bank or when he decided to tell someone that he did it. Story 10. The man that killed my grandfather had never so much as had a speeding ticket. He was married with kids and fell behind on rent. My grandfather, that was in his 80 years old, worked for the company that rented this guy his home for extra money. Grandpa couldn't reach him about his rent, so went and did a welfare check. The guy panicked and murdered my grandfather. Destroyed more than one life in a matter of 30 seconds. Story 11. Pretty successful woman at a company I worked got drunk, took an Uber home from a party, realized she left the keys to her apartment behind, so she decided to climb up to her second-story balcony to get her spare set. She slipped, paralyzed herself, couldn't work for a year, racked up ridiculous medical debt, and the pandemic left her position useless, so she was let go. Story 12. My former roommate had a great job, made great money, had his own house in which I rented a room. The only problem was he was a serious alcoholic and a crafty person. He'd get up at 4:30 to go to work, get off at 2, and then hit the bar until 11, every single night. Unless he had a girl coming over, then he'd come home at 10, do a quick cleanup of his filthy room, and have obnoxious and very inconsiderate loud sex. He hit a guy who was riding his bike drunk driving his way home one night, fled the scene, came home, and went to the neighbor's house and said he hit a pole. The neighbor called the police, and on the way to the house, they found the guy he hit with his front bumper next to the body. He went to jail for homicide, did 6 months, and got out. Now he lives with his parents and can't get a job because his story is a little infamous in our town. His sister took over his mortgage and lives in his house now. All he does all day is cry on Facebook about how life isn't fair. Story 13. My father punched a window out of anger, almost passed away from injuries, effectively removed his ability to work with his hands, which was the one thing he had going for him. He then became a moody poos alcoholic. Actually, he always was one, but way worse after this. He then beat the neighbor across the road with a pipe after they got drunk and got into an argument. He was arrested and went to jail. My parents lost the family home. They ended up splitting. I went no contact with him. 2 years later, he took his life. Story 14. Third-hand story from a former coworker. One of the other Marines at the base where he was stationed in the 90s stole plastic explosives from the test range and tried to sell them at a bar that was literally line of sight from the base. The first person to show any interest was an officer. That guy might still be in Leavenworth. Story 15. A guy I went to high school with was playing bottle rocket tag with some friends and took one to the eye, which blinded him. He was a senior ready to go to college on a baseball pitching scholarship. Story 16. That Aussie guy who on a dare ate a slug that had a parasite, developed a gnarly brain infection, ended up in a coma for a year, woke up paralyzed, then passed away in 2018. He was only 19 when it happened. Story 17. Security company. This happened before I worked there, but some coworkers told me the story. Guy was doing well at his job and got lots of promotions, on his way to lieutenant, but was too into his job and got a police scanner that he would listen to. One day, just as he was getting off work, a high-speed chase went by. He hoped in his personal vehicle with his firearm, got to the front of the chase, blocked the suspect in, and pulled his gun. Suddenly, the cops were much more interested in the crazy guy with a gun. Got hit with several felony charges. Story 18. Some guy tried to come into my nightclub when he was clearly too drunk. I made the call to not let him in, so he starts shouting at me and tries to aggressively walk up to me. I put my hands up in defense, and he's pushing back against me. Then the dude lunged at my boss next to me, so my boss shoves him. The guy tumbles backwards and slams the back of his head on a curb. Paralyzed from the neck down forever. Tried to take my boss to court for $15 million, but the camera showed this guy instigating everything. Story 19. He was going to be the one to put our dinky little private school on the map by going to the National Football League as a kicker. He fell off a picnic table that was being pulled behind a pickup truck at a party, pasture surfing. By the time I saw him again a year later, he could almost feed himself without assistance. Story 20. A guy I went to high school with didn't look both ways when he was crossing the street on his skateboard. A motorcyclist hit and guy passed away. The motorcyclist was hospitalized and lived. Story 21. The 17-year-old girl that was driving 105 miles per hour down a dark desert road at 6:35 a.m. Next week will have been 3 years since it happened. She hit me head on, and that was it for her. I drive past her memorial on the side of the road every day, and I think about how someone with so much ahead of them could lose everything due to one bad decision. Story 22. Kid in middle school was walking home with headphones in, stopped to wait for a train to pass, but was unfortunately standing on another train's tracks as he waited. Story 23. A local police chief did a hit and run over the weekend on a parked, unattended vehicle, in his department vehicle. By the end of the day, Tuesday, he was resigning. State police investigated and issued a bunch of summary offense citations. DUI was not among the charges. No one was hurt and the guy resigned, but, there's only one reason you drive away from hitting something after midnight. Story 24. A neighbor, his wife, and his friend's wife were at the neighbor's house. The two men both got into arguments with their wives, and decided to go out drinking down the street. A few hours later, I'm woken up by my sister banging on my bedroom door. I was staying with them at the time, because a car crashed, doing probably 80 miles per hour right next to our home. I jumped out of bed and got outside to see the neighbor's car crashed into a tree and two men trapped inside. The tree the car hit stopped them from ramming into another neighbor's house, and they hit it so hard the battery was in the street after ours. Their car caught fire, and we had to watch them pass away. Still see it and smell it every now and then when trying to sleep. I had never met the wife, so I had no idea who she was when she came up and asked me what happened. So I said some guy crashed his car. She took off running after she recognized the car. Can't believe I told her that her husband passed away so bluntly. Story 25. A guy I know robbed a bank with a note saying something along the lines of, "Put the money in the bag," was released on bond within a few weeks, went back to the same bank with another note, and robbed it again. I think he got 35 years. Multiple instances comprised of multiple minutes each. But yeah. Story 26. My ex sent CP to himself via email, and the company immediately reported it to the police. He was arrested a couple weeks later and is now serving a 7-year prison sentence with lifetime registration. Story 27. Childhood friend thought his wife was cheating on him with one of her co-workers, so he goes to the guy's house, waits for him to get off work, and jumps him with a metal bar thing. Left him laying with injuries, drove down to some old abandoned buildings by the docks, and ended it. They had a kid and another on the way. She wasn't cheating on him. Dude had major insecurities. Story 28. This one I say with a heavy heart. Best friend was testing his bike about 200 meters from his house after a service and fixing a few parts. Wasn't speeding at all, but had to swerve to avoid a mother and baby in the pram as they crossed onto the footpath, bridge he was on. Essentially, it's a blind corner leading onto the bridge, so cannot see who's coming until they actual step foot. He slid off the bike to avoid the pair of them and hit his head on a pole. Wasn't wearing a helmet or speeding, was simply testing the bike at probably 50 kilometers per hour. I was stuck with him groaning in pain. Waited for about 30 minutes before an ambulance arrived. Ambulance realized they couldn't help, so had to call in a helicopter. Was in a coma with severe trauma for 2 weeks and passed away from pneumonia. Last words I ever said to him when he was completely conscious was, "Wear your helmet." He said, "I'll be back in a minute or two." Rest in peace. Story 29. Army Staff Sergeant was on track to be the next probably Sergeant Major. Great guy, can lead troops. Smart, motivated others. All in all, a great soldier. We came back from Iraq, and that weekend he'd do us into a tree, horrifically maiming the soldier in the passenger seat. Guy lost an eye and use of most his face and mouth. I didn't stay in long enough to see the outcome, but doubt he recovered. Story 30. He picked a fight in basic training. Stupid pecking order, alpha male bullcrap, got us into the corner of a wall locker, and he has bad injuries. Think he was in the hospital for 4 months. Not sure how disabled he ended up being. Story 31. There's a guy I went to school with, super smart, full ride to a good college out of state. We were seniors at the time, so 2019, we had a guy come in and give us a presentation on World War II stuff, including some guns that had the firing pins taken out. Dude took a picture of one as it was being passed around and posted it on Snapchat with the caption, "Don't come to school tomorrow." He got suspended, lost his scholarship, and we never really heard from him again. He's still alive, a fake, but he's keeping his head down. Story 32. I work in a mall, and someone tried to steal from the Lululemon store across the way. She got caught, panicked, and for some reason pulled the fire alarm on her way out of the store, which I'm pretty sure is a felony where I live. All happened in like 5 minutes, and she was taken away in cuffs. Story 33. Guy I went to high school was at a bar. Spoke to a girl at the bar. She said she had a boyfriend. He said okay and left it alone. Boyfriend was not impressed. Waited for him to go out for a smoke and sucker punched him. Fell and passed away. So pointless. Story 34. My dad was an addict. He would take his various combination of pills and fall asleep, wake up and forgot he took them, and then take them all again. One day he didn't wake back up. Story 35. My dear friend and ex, who I met back in high school, worked for the Conservation Corps and loved it. He had such a passion for the natural environment and had recently been accepted into university to pursue a degree related to environmental sciences in the fall. One day in May of 2023, he was out in the field on a four-wheeler doing his job, and he was traversing an incline. He somehow lost control, and the four-wheeler flipped, and he passed away. He was 26 years old. I remember him fondly and often, and I hope he didn't suffer. Story 36. A guy I used to work with tried to rob a bank in blackface to make police look for a black man. Good thing his efforts were terrible. This was maybe 15 years ago, so I don't know if he's out of prison now or what. Story 37. I was a high school teacher in a bad area. I had two brothers, one was 1 year older than the other, in my classes. They went tagging one night with their crew, tagged on an old lady's trash can. She came out and yelled at them. One of the kids they were with had a gun and shot her, passed away. All the boys are spending a life sentence in prison. Story 38. Nephew was driving a borrowed truck when he and a buddy picked up a friend. Then the buddy shot the friend twice and he passed away. Then they dumped the body, returned the truck, and went home. Next day, went back to clean up the truck and were both arrested for murder. My nephew pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and testified against the shooter, did a few years in prison, got out, and is no longer welcome anywhere. He's not able to leave South Dakota due to the felony conviction. And nobody in our family has any interest in helping him out, so he's stuck there where everyone knows him as a murderer. Story 39. Guy I knew had it all looking up, married his work colleague, had a kid together, bought a small house. But he just made the stupidest decisions when he got drunk. Has an argument with his wife, storms out and decides to drown his sorrows. Misses the last bus home and instead of walking or getting a taxi decides to try sleeping in a park known for homeless substances users. Ends up spilling his heart out and how he'll do anything to numb the pain. They offer him substances. He takes it. 3 days later, his family are panicking. They can see he's withdrawing money but can't find him. Eventually find him passed out in some alleyway. Mom books him into rehab out of her own pocket. Lose his job, his wife, his kid, his house. All because he didn't want to face his wife after an argument. He's cobbled together a life now, but you can't help but think what could have been for better or worse. Story 40. Former roommate of mine was a sergeant on a suburban police unit. Got busted viewing adult film on the unit's computers. Couldn't get any other job except security. Story 41. After most of the guests had left our home at the end of my son's 2nd birthday, we heard a loud crash outside. A guy driving down our street was upside down. His front-wheel drive vehicle made contact with the tire of a parked car, and the rubber on rubber flipped his car. I rushed out barefooted, saw empty beer cans thrown from his car. Turns out he didn't have a seatbelt on. I could hear agonal breathing, got my sister-in-law to call the ambulance. He continued to have agonal breathing. Ambulance secured him and drove him off. Doubt he survived, but didn't have enough info to check. Story 42. My brother. He had 5 kids and a wife and some rage issues. About 25 years ago, he was at his son's soccer game and one of the other dads struck up a conversation about soccer with my brother's wife. My brother damn lost his mind. He punched that guy, grabbed his wife by the hair, and dragged her to his truck. Several witnesses testified about this later. Once they were home, he entered the kitchen, shoved his wife up against the fridge, and she passed away. The kids testified to this. He then loaded the kids into his truck, grabbed his rifle, and headed toward the city where his plan was to kill me, our father, his kids, and then himself, to spare them all from the shame. Thankfully, he had threatened this many times to many people. Traffic was crap that day, and he was intercepted by police. He served 20 years of his sentence. I testified twice as his parole hearings, trying to prevent him from getting out because I knew what he was and always would be. He was eventually released, but passed away 2 days later in a car accident. Story 43. He gave his substances supplier photocopies of cash instead of real cash. He thought they wouldn't notice. They beat him so bad he got brain damage and can't walk. Story 44. My bio father got his second due T-boning someone in an intersection. His wife told him this was it. If he got in any more trouble, she wasn't going to bail him out. Well, a few weeks later, he missed his court date for some reason or another. It was not because he was drunk, but still no excuse. Gets picked up on a bench warrant for the initial charge. Wife gets the call, hears the charge, says, "Damn him, let him rot," thinking it's a third DUI. Takes a week for word to get to his sponsor that he's in jail again. Sponsor goes to talk to him, realizes it's not a new DUI, and fills in his wife, who goes and gets him all sorry. He's totally okay with it because of the circumstances. Also, this means he knows she really means business. Second DUI, so no diversion programs allowed. Does his time. This is also when I finally tracked him down. His wife told me he was off painting fences the next town over and would be back next month. Damn, I'm a sheltered kid, and I believed it Elmau. Actually, made it stick and stayed clean and sober. I went down to meet him a year later, and he brought me to his AA meeting all proud that he was getting his 1-year chip. Fast forward a decade and change. Not only does he still have that 1-year chip, and many more, but he's got his foster certification, and he's taking on high-risk boys for foster care that need a sponsor and help fighting addiction. Story 45. Was at a brewery with a buddy. We were regulars there and know the owners. A group of guys come in, and one of them gets absolutely crap-faced. Pretty sure he was doing substances as well. He was looking like he was about to fall down, so I invited him to take a seat at our booth. We talk for a bit. I ask him what sort of hobbies he has, things he likes to do. He says video games. I reply that I love video games too. I'm a game designer. He then stands up and says, "Duck you." Confused, I just stared at him and said, "What?" He says, "This guy is making fun of me." Me and my buddy explained that I'm a game developer and I was not at all making fun of him. I say, "I can't tell if you're being serious or just ducking with me." He then slaps me hard across the face. He says, "Can you tell now?" I'm flabbergasted. Can't believe what just happened. I say, "You can't just slap people. That's not okay, dude." The bartender is a friend and saw the whole thing. Lucky he's a bigger guy, which I am not, and immediately grabs the guy and kicks him out. Here's the kicker, though. This was a work outing for him. Not only that, but I found out later my brother worked at the same place. I hear from him that he not only got fired, but his fiancée left him too. I guess she was at the bar. Story 46. Kid I worked with. He went out in our local city, got drunk, got in a fight, punched the guy. Guy fell and passed away. 14 years in prison. Story 47. A chick I knew threw everything away. Husband, kids, job, friends. All because she wanted to be high as duck all the time. It happened seemingly overnight. She emptied out her husband's bank account, then just ducked off. The last we heard, she odd and passed away a few years ago. Our heads are still spinning, wondering why. Story 48. My Pee-wee football coach. He was beating his wife, and his neighbor came over, and they got into an altercation. Neighbor went home with the coach's wife and kids. Coach went back inside, got his gun, went over to the neighbor's front door and shot neighbor. Coach tried to plead self-defense, but his red liquid trail showed he went inside, got his gun, went back outside, and back to the neighbor's house. Boom. Story 49. There was a guy I knew called Pete. Pete liked to drink, and soon he got the nickname Party Pete. The trouble was, I think he decided that he had to live up to that nickname. He worked at a takeaway in town, but lived a long walk up a hill out of town. One morning, his boss's wife came past the takeaway and saw that the door was open. She went to see what was going on and found Party Pete passed out half in and half out of the open door. She woke him up and asked him what he was doing, at which point he called her a damn idiot. So that was Party Pete out of a job. He didn't worry, though. He'd been selling substances from the takeaway, and now he decided that would be his full-time job. Now he didn't have to worry about getting up for work, and he got more and more into the Party Pete persona. At Christmas, I was round at a friend's house for dinner. It was all very nice, a little bit drunk, a lot of good food. Suddenly, Party Pete showed up, uninvited. He caused chaos, spilling red wine on one guest's nice white dress. The host had a photo of her father in the kitchen. He had died several years earlier, and she liked to have him there, watching over the festivities. He knocked that over and spilled a drink on it. He was firmly told that it was time for him to leave. Now comes the part where he ducked things up for himself. He decided to drive home. On the way, he crashed into a woman's car that was parked in her driveway. She came out and said she was going to call the police. He offered her 2,000 euros. She said, "What use is that to me? You've destroyed my car." She called the police. They wanted to see some ID. He said his ID was at home. They drove him to his house. They told him to go in and get his passport. He went in. Several minutes passed, and the police decided that they had to go and see what was going on. He had fallen asleep, and the police saw the fruit bowl full of substances on his kitchen table, so he ended up getting locked up. But the police gave him a way out, tell them who all the other dealers in town were, especially who was supplying them. He gave them the names of every dealer in town, including his housemate, which made things very awkward for them when they were both released. He also gave the name of the main supplier who lived down the valley, a chap with the delightful name Killer. When he was released, people suddenly turned up in town going to the bars he used to go to, asking if anyone had seen him. He didn't dare leave the house because of Killer's friends. He couldn't stay at home because of his housemate. In the end, his parents had to come and get him, pack up his life, and take him home with them. He's never been heard of again. Story 50. I had a coworker who was looking down at their cell phone and stepped off a curb, under the rear wheels of a delivery truck making a right. That was that. Very tragic. Story 51. For some reason that I cannot begin to comprehend, the school bus driver in our small village used to let two brothers out on one side of the railroad tracks, even though they lived on the other side of the railroad tracks. The older brother, 16 years old, liked the thrill of beating the train by running across the tracks if a train was coming. You could hear the train as it would blow, its horn coming into the village, but not see the train until you were right up on the tracks due to village buildings' proximity to the tracks. One day, as he sprinted across, there was a second train coming from the opposite direction on a second set of tracks. So the younger brother and all the remaining students on the bus watched as not one, but two trains obliterated this man. Story 52. Guess I know a lot of these. A friend was taking a nap with his newborn on a waterbed and rolled over the baby. The baby didn't make it, and he's never been the same. Story 53. A kid in my class from intermediate school, who I'll refer to as G for this story, decided one night to go out with a bunch of other kids to local mall after the last day of school for the year and decided to use the shortcut. This shortcut was known by all the local kids and essentially was a large stormwater pipe that ran parallel underneath a large section of a very busy highway and backed onto the parking lot of the local mall. So instead of having to take a 20-minute walk up multiple hills from the school, our neighborhood, this shortcut cut it to about 5 minutes and was right near the cinema and bowling alley. I wasn't very close to G initially, but we were friendly through the years. I found out a few days prior to this incident when we had a track and field day at school that G had a large deformity in his foot, which was a key factor to how the incident unfolded. You'd think that the mention of the stormwater pipe drain would lead into something to do with water, but no, it takes a more random turn. So G, along with some others, used the shortcut in the afternoon whilst it was still daylight, so no problem navigating it come later into the night, not sure exactly when. When it was time to go home, the group all went their separate ways, with most either catching a bus home or getting picked up by their parents. But G and one other kid decided to go back to the drain shortcut and started to make their way back through. However, both kids got spooked when they got to the entrance of the drain, and with it being late and scared they were going to get in trouble from their parents, went back up behind the mall and decided to try run across the highway. The first kid made it across, and then when G attempted to do so, was unfortunately struck by a large logging truck going 60 miles per passed away instantly. The surviving kid reported that when G attempted to run across the highway, that his foot gave out, so he stumbled into the oncoming truck. The rumors that went around, which allegedly originated from close friends of G, were that the two kids got to the drain and G heard voices at the other end of the tunnel, but they sounded like older kids, or possibly adults. So this scared them, and that when they got down to the drain entrance, it was simply pitch black, and they got lost trying to get back up to the mall. So they followed the only light they could see, which was the street lighting from the highway. About a day or so after his funeral, the local council went down and installed metal grates on each side of the pipe entrance so it was locked solid. And then the local council pledged that they would build a bridge over the highway to discourage people from trying to run across the highway at night, as there were reports that some younger kids were still doing it, and some seeing it as a game of playing chicken. It took many years, but they did end up building that bridge. This memory will stick with me for the rest of my life as one. I have to drive under this bridge nearly every day for my work commute, so I see that bridge and know the reason why it was built and what happened in that exact spot and two, which is heartfelt to me and makes me a bit teary as I write. This is that on the day of that track and field I earlier mentioned, was that on that day the final event was that all the grades came together and had a marathon race that spanned around the school's outlying property. Me being the slow, fat kid took ages to finish, and I was walking around the last corner back to school to the finish line. G was sitting nearby under a tree and said he was wondering where I was and that he also didn't want to walk back by himself, so we agreed to walk back together. We got back to the school grounds and were overwhelmed that we took so long. We essentially made the whole school wait, and there were about 50 kids sitting and just staring at us like we were complete losers for being last. I said to G, he can walk over the line, as he was kind enough to walk back with me, as even with his problem, he could still beat me in a race, so it's only be right he cross and be listed as second to last, and he was like, nah, my bro, we'll both be last. So with a bunch of kids and teachers watching, we stood over the finish line at the same time, forcing the timekeeper to register us with the same finish time. Since we were young, we said, well, we're both second to last, so nobody really lost, did they? Story 54. My husband had just parked in front of the casino, and I heard a noise behind me that sounded like a dull thud. It was right by valet parking, and I thought maybe someone had a fender bender. Then I turned around and saw someone on the ground, and as I was maybe 100 feet away, I ran toward the person while calling 911, thinking he had been hit by a car. But within the next few seconds, it was obvious he had come from the parking garage above us. He hit his body. I was speaking to 911 at this point, and I asked them if I could check for a pulse, as I do know first aid. They told me if I was comfortable then to go ahead. I remember the security person from the casino, who seemed to me to take a really long time to get there, but that could be a side effect of the adrenaline in my system, telling me not to touch him, and telling him that 911 was a higher authority than him, and so I did check for a pulse. I'll never forget touching my fingers to his neck, because before I could even be sure there was none, I was struck by how not warm he was. Not cold, but the difference between his skin and living skin was difficult to process, and also to describe. The casino is less than 2 blocks from a fire station, and it was no time at all before over 20 emergency vehicles were on site. I stepped back to let the first responders do their jobs, and a police officer asked if I had seen him fall. I told him I hadn't, just happened to be the closest person to him and had called 911. They didn't need me, so I proceeded to shake like a leaf for a while and had several drinks to calm my nerves in the casino. I had weird dreams for a while, and something that really helped me come to terms with everything is an article I read a few months later. Turns out the same man had jumped off another parking deck of a casino in a city nearby around 6 months before and miscalculated and landed in the river, knowing that he struggled enough that he tried more than once. Perhaps this is strange, but I found a degree of comfort knowing that he did what he set out to do. It's been 8 years since that happened, and it will be with me forever. Story 55. A friend's son leaned back in his chair. Chair slipped, looked like he was going to be a quadriplegic, but he had breathing issues and passed away 2 weeks later. Story 56. My father solicited online. It was a sting. At the time, he was a software engineer who worked for a defense contractor. Needless to say, he was immediately fired. Mom divorced him and got primary custody of my brother and me. He spent the last dozen or so of his short, miserable life designing library software. Story 57, a guy blew his life up. And then his idiot brother blasted things into orbit trying to cover it up. Some campus cops were trying to help my belligerent apartment hallway neighbor home to his on-campus apartment. He'd already had several run-ins with them, including copping a possession charge and being evicted from his frat. His parents would raise absolute hell, though. And so I think these cops figured if they just got him safely home, that would suffice for the night. But he started getting combative and ridiculous with them, arguing and refusing to actually go inside and stay there. He was getting handsy. I heard it for myself. The cop said, "Friend, I don't want to arrest you again tonight. So if you just go inside by the count of 10, I won't arrest you, and you can sleep this off." Well, Mr. Dumby of the Year says in a super rapid voice from 1 to 10, "Arrest me then, ducker," and shoved his wrist into the cop's face. Yeah. And then his brother came outside all, "Well, if I give you the weed I'm selling from out of the apartment, will you just let him go?" Guys, remember when I said this was an on-campus apartment? Story 58. When I was a senior in high school, they had a weird thing where you had to show up to the school to get your diploma. They also gave out the yearbooks too, so that was okay. I told my buddy we were all going cruising and he really should tag along, find a party or some girls. He told me he didn't have any money and his mom was going to pick him up at the gas station that was 3 miles away. He wanted to run there instead of us giving him a ride. I tried to get him to come with us. Really tried. He wouldn't budge. Found out some kid was drinking after he got the diploma, I guess a lot. He was driving afterwards, swerved off the side of the road, and hit some kid that should not have been running to a gas station. He should have been being a kid in the backseat of a car on the last day we were still technically in high school. He should have been with me. That was a heavy casket to carry. He raised homing pigeons, and at his grave, they let them loose. It was beautiful. I sure miss you, David. Wish you came with me that night. Story 59. Guy I know found a drunk, unconscious girl at a party. Abused her and got caught. Doing prison time, and when he gets out, everybody knows, so he probably won't go back to town. Story 60. A guy I know that I was friends with in elementary school is currently in jail for murder. In hindsight, the psychology of it all kind of makes sense. His mom didn't want him and moved across the country to party and not be responsible for him. I don't even know the situation with his dad. He ended up living with his grandparents who held him accountable for absolutely nothing, but tried to seem like harasses. He ended up joining a gang near the end of high school, and as an initiation thing, he and a couple other new guys had to take a guy that was leaving the gang out into the boonies and beat him. They just basically knocked out the guy real hard and then left. Story 61. When I was 26 years old, 1976 year, a gentle, artistic friend from high school smoked and provided small amounts to close friends. Unbeknownst to him, his fiance's younger sister, a teenager, had been arrested for possession of substances, was taken downtown to the police station and terrified by members of the substances squad. They told her they would send her to prison unless she gave them a dealer. She didn't know any real dealers, and definitely not any substances dealers. She approached my friend and asked him to sell her some substances. He told her he didn't use substances and didn't know any substances dealers. She persisted and said she wanted to buy substances. Finally, he agreed and he went and found her substances. She wanted to do the deal at a bank parking lot, which in 1976 was one of the few places where you could pretty much guarantee there would be hidden video cameras. It was, of course, a setup. He got into her car and handed her the substances. As soon as she gave him the money, cops came from everywhere. He got 5 years in state prison. He was brutalized in prison by other inmates. He went in a gentle soul and came out a very bitter, hate-filled. He could not get a job because of the felony conviction. He figured, since I already have the name, I might as well have the game, and started dealing substances for real. He got busted again. This time, he got 10 years in a federal pen, but served 5. He was never the same. After that first bit in prison, and the brutal treatment he received in prison ruined his life. He was set up by someone he trusted, but the decision to do the deal was his own. Story 62. Had a friend who was 2 months away from a medical release from the military, was nicely set up and wouldn't have to work another day in his life, decided to get caught distributing substances. Military discharged him no medical pension, and he's now in jail. Maybe not destroying his life in a matter of minutes, but definitely ruined the rest of his life with a few bad decisions in a row. Story 63. Went kayaking in freezing waters. Kayak overturned, drowned, passed away. He was a great guy. First semester of college, good grades. Just an all-around tragedy. Story 64. A buddy of mine was dating a woman who wasn't a good fit. She began cheating on him a lot. They broke up. He decided to sleep with her one last time. She got pregnant. Funny part is, we kept saying he had to get a paternity test as soon as he could because we all knew she was sleeping with at least 3 other people at the time. As soon as the kid was born, nobody said he needed one anymore. The kid looks exactly like him, like a clone. Story 65. Guy I went to school with and who used to bully me, beat to death a student set to graduate from Bowie State University to death in College Park. The victim, was in correctional institution, about to be commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army after graduating. Attacker avoided life without parole due to the FBI not charging him with any federal hate crimes. Was sentenced with life with the possibility for parole. Story 66. This is really recent, so the fallout is still ongoing. Business manager, compliance officer, specialist teacher for in school, 30 years experience, all the registrations. Had a huge temper tantrum out of nowhere and went on a massive half-hour expletive-ridden rant about how much he hated the head teacher, other teachers, and owner of the school. During which he detailed how he wanted to injure said people, that he knew where their kids went to school and would do the same to them, and then set fire to the school and watch it burn, whether the kids were there or not. The whole time his wife, also an employee of the school, was begging him to stop and calm down. Obviously, this was recorded shortly after he got going and wouldn't stop, reported to Board of Governors. Threat to life and property meant it was informally reported to the police as per policy, mostly for completeness. Police went to have a chat and check on his wife, as domestic violence was very likely. No idea what happened during that chat, but he ended up arrested and spending a night in the cells. Police asked for formal statements and all evidence. Obviously, he immediately lost his job for gross misconduct, lost his teaching registration, and has a note on his DB's record, police background check, about his risk of violence against children, so he'll never work in schools or with vulnerable people again, which has been the focus of his entire professional career. Police are currently deciding what to formally charge him with. Worst thing is that his wife refused to make any statement against him, saying no comment or that she didn't remember to all questions about the incident. Normally, that would be legal, but as she works with children, she's a mandatory reporter and legally must report any threat to children, which she repeatedly refused to do, quite obviously for fear of reprisal from him at home. But even when offered support for victims of domestic violence, she didn't comply with the police. So she ended up losing her job too, as well as her registrations. And now she also has a note on her DB's record and will also never work with children or vulnerable people again. She may also be charged for her failure to aid the police in their investigation despite being a mandatory reporter. 2 30 years careers in a specialist field completely ruined by one totally disproportionate temper tantrum. Story 67. One of my lifelong friends did. Perfectly healthy and normal 35-year-old guy, driving on a highway in the late evening, on his way back from a wedding in a small town. So he's unfamiliar with the road and following global positioning system. He got a text from his mom, looked down to read it, and didn't see the sharp curve in the highway, and flew into the ditch. When he came to a stop, he was able to call 911 and get an ambulance out there. It turned out that he broke his lower back in the crash, and he's paralyzed from about the belly button down. No control over bowels or bladder, can't feel or move anything down there. This was a few months ago. The worst of the exterior injuries have healed, but he's still in a care facility and he's struggling. That reminds me, I need to go visit him again. I missed last week. Story 68. I work in ambulance. All the overdoses come to mind. The worst one was, somebody passed away while in bed with their husband and baby. Baby was in the room while we did artificial respiration. Story 69. Technically, it was over a longer period, but one night and one moment, he lost it all. Was a husband and his family, wife and daughter, at our restaurant, and they stuck out because it was 10:30 p. They were the last table, and we closed at 11 that night. Both wife and daughter eventually raised their voices at him in a scolding and condescending tone. They were drilling him hard, and by then, we were already locking up the doors. Usually, we have the side door where customers who have stayed until the end can exit through. I asked my mom what was going on since most of our regulars are a part of our ethnic community, which is super tight-knit here in our city, and she knew them as acquaintances. Regulars. Apparently, the husband had a huge gambling problem, has debts used for gambling, and that night he finally took the entire family and the car with him over the edge of the cliff. He took out a loan that used their primary home as collateral and lost it all in a single night of a streak of bets at the local casino. So now their entire family was broke, in debt, and soon to be homeless. The daughter was of college age and attending university at that time, so no idea how she was going to proceed from that point on, but I'm guessing it played a part in her rage that night. Their situation hit home base for me since my dad was also an extreme gambling addict, and half of my childhood is filled with him fighting against my mom and his in-laws when he would very often show up in the middle of night asking for more money just to run out of the house past midnight to hit up the tables again. Luckily, my parents are separated and my mom kept the family business, and we are doing much, much better a decade later. Story 70. My dad had a great career with the county. He took a leave of absence from his job and during that time applied and received another job with the state. Since both are in the pension system, he received 3 charges for theft and some other crap and was fired from both. Ruined his life with one decision. Story 71. My nephew. His uncles, who are both adults with criminal records, ex-sister-in-law's brothers, convinced him at 17 to join them a home invasion. robbery of a home where they knew no one was home. They blamed everything on him since he was a minor and the one caught with the stolen property. He was tried as an adult. He's now 22 years old with a felony, and he's been in prison for almost 4 years. He was getting regularly attacked at the facility he was placed at, and prior to a visitation, they found him with a makeshift shiv to protect himself. So his parole was denied, and he had an extra 18 months tacked on to the full sentence. It also caused him to be relocated to maximum security. To hear him talk about it scares me, and I'm not a skinny little 22-year-old kid like he is. My brother gathered up the rest of his kids and moved across the country to get them away from his ex's family. His mom is also in prison for similar crap. Story 72. Back in 2021, my best friend aspirated in his sleep after vomiting. His girlfriend called an ambulance, telling them she didn't know what was happening, but mentioned that he had asthma. He was rushed to the hospital, and his family and friends were called, but no one knew what was going on. He spent 5 days before his family made the heartbreaking decision to take him off life support. There were no signs of him coming out of the coma. At first, I was in shock. I assumed he had overdosed because all the signs pointed in that direction. He was known to dabble in substances occasionally. But his girlfriend swore up and down that he hadn't taken anything that night and that it was completely random. Fast forward, and she finally admitted to me that he had taken a perk that night for back pain. It wasn't prescribed. It was bought from a dealer. He could have been saved. This man literally kept Narcan in his room and in his truck. He was the kind of person who would help anyone, always making sure he had some on hand in case someone around him overdosed. 3 months after his funeral, his girlfriend also overdosed. Her family kept her on life support for 7 months before they made the same decision to let her go. Story 73. My best friend growing up had been in the United States Olympic ski team. Along the way to training in Argentina, he picked up a parasite and lost weight, went all over the United States to find out what was wrong and cure it. It took years. He never went back to skiing. He started taking stupid risks, picked up 2 hitchhikers, got in a car accident, one passed away, maimed the other, and slammed into 15 cars along the way, wrecking the lives of a number of them. A few years later, he robbed a bank, spent 30 years in prison. I met up with him after this. I tried to help, but he is incapable of helping himself. So sad. Story 74. I do. Good friend, very successful, multimillionaire business owner, headed to fantastic retirement, got drunk at a bar, drove home just a few miles, and ran over and maimed a homeless woman. Money gone. Business gone, off to jail. Reputation immediately turned to crap as local media was all over it. Story 75. My cousin got drunk at a Renaissance fair and picked a fight with one of the security guards. Turned out he was an off-duty cop, got a felony and spent 2 years in prison in Texas. Story 76. New recruit to the company in their first job, one of those here's your chance type roles. 2 weeks in, there's a leaving drinks function. Genius features drinks way too much and sticks his hand up the skirt of a peer in full view of the entire room. She reflexively kicks like a mule and breaks his nose. He gets to turn up to work on Monday to find his personal effects in a box with security. Screams some threats, leaves, gets rip-roaring drunk and attempts to drive his car through the front of the building, but it wedges as he attempted to mount the curb and is stuck. One cascade of stupid decisions later, he's sentenced to 3 months. Has a broken nose, no job, smashed up car, and the story has circulated enough that he's not likely getting another offer in that industry. Story 77. She started using meat then one night, got in an argument with her mom. Things started escalating and her mom called the cops. Her dad kicked her out and she's been a homeless addict since. It's been 10 years now. Story 78, former boss of mine. Was the manager of the fast food place I worked at in high school. Was married with 2 stepdaughters, one in college and the other in high school. One night while at home, his wife came to him and asked for a divorce. He started beating his wife. His older stepdaughter came to try to help her mom, and he began beating her too. The stepdaughter survived, but his wife passed away at the scene. He ended up being charged with first-degree murder for his wife and attempted murder for his stepdaughter. He tried to claim he was innocent due to temporary insanity and say it was a crime of passion. Jury didn't buy it, so now he's serving a life sentence without parole. Multiple appeals have been denied. Story 79. Last year, a young influencer in my country, known for his crafty videos acting as a spoiled rich kid, brutally attacked an older woman in a parking lot. The attack lasted 8 seconds. The footage of the assault went viral on the news and social media. Got 17 years in prison for that? It was less than a matter of minutes for him. Story 80. An ex. She got drunk at a bar, assaulted me to the point of needing cops involved, and she had to deal with the court system for domestic violence charges. There was no pattern of this behavior. It could ruin any future job prospects, isolate her from people that find out, from a rather easy-to-find public record, and all for what was a drunken cash shoot. I was a week away from proposing, but the silver lining was it happened before it became harder to separate due to marriage, kids, shared property, etc. Story 81. Beautiful, gorgeous, blonde bartender, 22 years old, fell asleep at home with a lit cigarette in her hand and eventually dropped into one of the cushions. It didn't spark a fire, but shouldered and filled the house with smoke. She passed away. She was a very kind girl, and consequently had a lot of single, geeky regulars who would sit at her bar daily or weekly, certainly in love with her. The first Sunday after her funeral, there was a celebration of life at her pub. A few regulars had been away for a week and didn't know what happened. I remember them walking in on their regular day to see her, asking where was, and then fully breaking down when the manager pulled them aside to tell them what happened. Story 82, local school official's granddaughter. Her mother passed away, so she was being raised by her grandparents. She was 15 years old, I think. She snuck out one night with 2 boys. They got in a car accident. Her and the other passenger passed away. They weren't wearing their seatbelts. I think the driver survived. Anyway, just went for a joyride with some friends and never came back. Story 83, this just happened a few months ago. My friend was hanging out in front of a local bar that attracts the seedier folks in our community. His girlfriend was bartending. It was Halloween, and a drunk regular was dressed as Bill the Butcher and had a real knife as part of his costume. And he was not being discreet about it, so the bar owner kicked him out. While escorting him out, they got into a fight in front of the bar. The drunk guy pulls out a gun and starts shooting. One person passed away and injuring 2 others. My friend tackled him to keep him from shooting more people and was hit himself. He is now a quadriplegic. I wouldn't say he ruined his life, but rather heroically sacrificed a huge part of his life to save others. Story 84. My late fiancé ended his life for the very simple thrill of going too fast on his motorcycle. It was a curved residential road, barely a minute from the house depending on if you caught the light. And when you're taking a curve fast, you tend to get in the other lane. So we're assuming that's what happened when suddenly a car appeared in the oncoming lane he was taking the turn on. Naturally, he went in the grass to get out of the way. Should have just laid the bike down, but knowing him was too full of pride. So he just took the curve in the grass at about 35 miles per hour, probably planning to get back on the road when it straightened out. What he wasn't anticipating was that the grass on the side of an upcoming driveway had receded, so the driveway was sticking up like 3 inches, not flush with the grass. That was all it took for him to go flying forward airborne right into the fire hydrant that just so happened to be on the other side of that driveway. All the gear in the world won't save you from blunt force trauma like that. I can't tell you how many times I sat right there on the side of the road just trying to make sense of how this had just happened to me. I was left with our 2-year daughter, and I was absolutely devastated. Story 85. In Mexico just recently, an idiot influencer just got 17 years in prison for punching a woman because apparently she scratched his mirror when she was parking next to him. Story 86. My life was ruined in a matter of seconds. A woman named Tiffany, driving her Toyota Sienna with her family in tow, turned left at Temple and Grand in Diatele. We were heading south on Grand, going straight through a green light at about 40 miles per hour on our motorcycle. I was on the back. She didn't see us. He passed away nearly instantly, and I was maimed. Half of my bones are now titanium. Story 87. My aunt. In her early 20 years old, she was married to a guy who was a bit of a tool. They were still in the process of moving into an apartment together, and they were done unpacking for the day. They had been drinking a bit, but my aunt wanted to go back to my grandparents' house for the night. Instead of calling for a ride, she let him convince her to hop on his motorcycle with him, and he would take her home. It was only 4 miles, but he didn't have a helmet for her. Halfway there, they got sideswiped by a truck and crashed into a telephone pole. He walked away with a few SCS. She hit her on the pavement and ended up in a coma for 2 months. When she came out of it, she had virtually no short-term memory and only limited control of her right arm. He divorced her, and she's been living with these challenges for the last 45 years. Over time, the damage has caused other issues too. She occasionally has outbursts of anger and frequently has auditory hallucinations of voices. She can't live independently or hold a job, so now my grandmother, who is almost 90 years old, and my dad have to take care of her. One stupid choice in her 20 years old ruined the rest of her life and had a massive negative impact on our entire family. Story 88. Picture a group of average 2000 suburban white high school guys from upper middle class families. A few played sports really well, but they weren't jocks. A few did the school play, but they weren't theater kids. Most of them had some musical talent, but they weren't in school band or choir. If anything, they were known for being pretty smart guys who knew every answer and kind of did their own thing together. At some point, substances became a part of their hangouts. When we were in 11th grade, I remember zoning out in class and listening to one of the guys debating whether he should let his little brother hang out with them that weekend. Little brother was in 8th grade. On Monday, they were laughing about how messed up this guy's little brother had gotten on whatever substance they introduced him to. Those guys all grew up and became successful. One got promoted to manager this week. Little brother spiraled into addiction and passed away of an overdose at 19 years. Story 89. I knew a bloke, very high achiever, top 1% academically in the state during high school, also played state football, had a bunch of athletics awards, had scholarship at university, doing medical with the aim to be a surgeon. He was midway through his final year at university, and he was at a youth camp-style thing. He was one of the instructors, leaders. One of the activities was a human pyramid. He was at the bottom. Someone misstepped. The pyramid came down. Pretty sure someone lodged their knee or foot in the wrong place in his back. He is now a vegetable. My heart breaks for him. Story 90. In Air Force basic military training, we had a guy who shoved an instructor and took a swing. A lot of failure to adapt was going on. He was taken into custody by security forces. We still saw him every now and then at the dining facility during mealtime. As we progressed through training, he rotted. He was separated as we graduated basic. Don't know what happened to him. Always felt bad that the decisions he made led to an outcome no one wanted. Story 91. A guy in our town robbed a bank in 2020 using an airsoft gun that was an imitation of an Uzi. He did it during the everyone masking up time period. He robbed the bank mask and glove-free. History, you could be in a bank, gloves and mask on, and nobody would blink. He chose not to. Anyway, he also drove his grandpa's car to the bank, and it was seen on security cams. Especially because he parked it in handicapped parking with his grandpa's handicap hanging permit still visible with the serial number it was easy to trace. I was there while robbed the place. We all recognized Craig from the one gas station in town since his dad owned it and he's worked there for years. I don't know why he did it, but he did it in the absolutely most ridiculous and stupid way. IDK, maybe Craig wanted to get caught. He ended up passed away in prison. He pleaded guilty right away. Story 92. He was in the military. Promising career. He was driving drunk, celebrating, had a terrible wreck. The 4 other men, his close friends in the car with him, passed away. He survived with minor injuries. The guilt broke his mind, spent decades in an asylum, barely responsive. He's out now, but still can't function. I've heard the phrase, looking haunted before. I know what it really looks like. Story 93. A couple of my friends in high school were riding in the back of a pickup truck and had allowed a 15-year-old drive. No alcohol was involved. The 15-year-old took a sharp turn too fast, and my friends were ejected out of the truck bed and into trees, swamp. They did not survive. Story 94. Police officer in an exclusive town. Very little going on. With Ott, he was pulling down $150,000. The guy was suspected of gassing up his personal car at the town's fuel pump. One night when he was on duty, the police chief and his captain hid in the bushes near the pumps. And sure enough, the cop puts the nozzle into his personal car and starts to fuel up. The chief and captain revealed themselves. The guy was caught red-handed. Cop lost his job, his lifetime medical coverage, and his pension over a few tanks of gasoline. Story 95. Someone I worked with spit on a cop during an emotional breakdown. They were in the hospital in excruciating pain. Cops approached and she spit on them and told them to leave her alone. Instant felony. Story 96. A cousin of mine grew up in a very affluent household in Vegas and attended a party college where he developed a habit of substances. He took them a lot, both in quantity and frequency. He ended up realizing he had a problem. I think an intervention was involved, and he went to rehab. He got out, went back to school, and buckled down. A few months later, he went to one party and decided a single night of partying would be okay. The problem was, he started back up at the same dose he was taking when he last was into his habit, not accounting for his months of sobriety. He passed away, basically instantly. Story 97. A friend of mine ate a s'mores at a high school bonfire that another friend had offered him. She was given it for free by the table that was selling them. He loves them and ate the whole thing. He almost immediately starts having an anaphylactic reaction. Apparently that s'more was one of the ones made with peanut butter cups instead of just Hershey's chocolate. He rode to the bonfire with his friends and kept his EPI pen in his car. His friends drove him back home as fast as they could. His dad took him to urgent care, and he passed away in his dad's arms in the parking lot. RIP. He was such an amazing soul. Story 98. A guy I used to date setting off small fireworks with his best friend when they were kids. The firework they had set on the ground tipped over, so they ran away from it to get out of the way. They accidentally ran into each other at full speed and smacked heads. His friend passed away from the injury. Such a freak accident that ruined both their lives. Story 99. I saw an ex-friend going from $3,000 in profit. We all entered the casino with $250, so we were super hyped. And when he walked out, he had a $10,000 loss, which he couldn't afford. He basically destroyed his whole life because he got triggered so badly. We all tried to stop him, but he was super stubborn. Story 100. A friend of mine from high school moved to the north around the pandemic, from Mexico City to Sinaloa. Everything was cool, and she was helping the family store. Suddenly, her Facebook fills with pics of her and her new BF, who's giving her 200 roses, bouquets, Gucci bags, iPhone, and a constant array of expensive gifts. He got in with an addict. 6-7 months later, and her profile pic is of her with black ribbons around her. Story 101. In the early 90s, the secretary at my dad's engineering firm had a feeling she was going to get let go at the end of the day. So she went to the hardware store and bought the biggest magnet there. Then when she did end up getting fired, she stuck the magnet on her computer tower and left. They found it the next day, and all the files were corrupted. She was the secretary to the company president, so there was a lot of stuff lost. I don't know the entire story, but I know she had a tough time finding another job for a while. Story 102. A friend downloaded League of Legends. Got so hooked onto it that it ended up costing him his marriage. This ex-wife ended up keeping the home and custody of their kid. Story 103. I was 2 at the time and never knew him. My uncle got called into work after sitting down to eat with my grandparents. My grandfather told him not to go, but he went anyway. My uncle was supposedly dating an ex-girlfriend of a local police sheriff here in Baltimore at the time. He was gunned down outside of work, shot 6 times, and passed away. My grandfather tried contacting America's most wanted private detectives. One day, police showed up to the house and told him to let this one go. We suspected police involvement. Story 104. My ex thought his life was so bad until he tried to beat me to death and was arrested. He lost his job, his cats, his home, his reputation, and his freedom. Even after he got out of jail, he lost his freedom to live how he wanted because the only person he had to lean on was his abusive religious zealot of a mother. On the phone with me in jail, he told me he couldn't believe he ruined it all. Story 105. A guy my mom worked with got into it with an old man in a restaurant. He knocked him out with one punch, and the old guy had a heart attack and passed away. Story 106. Superintendent in a local school here made really aggressive advances on a student. Like, really aggressive. No history of that behavior that anybody knows of. They reported it, and an arrest warrant was issued. They say the warrant came out, he drove to another state, scored some substances, and overdosed. Story 107. Freshman kid in high school beat his sister to death during a bickering match in the kitchen while their parents were having their anniversary dinner. He was tried as an adult. While the exact things said while bickering never became public knowledge, the kid's sister was a promising honor roll kid, and I imagine the parents' lives were also shattered in an instant. Story 108. My kids had a great football coach at their high school. He got recruited to a major college and was about to start the season when he got arrested for a DUI. Ruined his career.